Two people can watch the same movie and walk away with completely different interpretations. One sees empowerment, another sees exploitation. One laughs at a commercial, another gets angry at its use of stereotypes. This is not coincidence. This is culture. And it's exactly what Stuart Hall's cultural studies theory helps us to understand how power, ideology, and audience's interpretation shape what messages actually mean. Welcome back to Communication Campus. I'm your host, Dr. Malynnda Stewart. And in today's episode, we are going to explore cultural studies, one of the most influential frameworks in all of media theory. Now, it's developed by Stuart Hall and scholars at the Birmingham Center of Contemporary Cultural Studies. And cultural studies challenges us to meet and see media not as a neutral space, but as a political, cultural, and deeply connected to many questions of power. Now, cultural studies emerged in post war Britain in the 1960s during a time of massive social change, thinking decolonization, youth rebellions, and the rise of mass media. And at the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, scholars like Stuart Hall, Raymond Williams, and Richard Hogarth began studying everyday culture, the music, the media, the fashion of working class life. And they did this as legitimate forms of meaning making. For example, they asked how culture maintains social power. And more importantly, how can it resist it? Now, a big piece of this is idea of encoding and decoding. And this is Hall's most famous contribution. And he argued that media exchanges aren't just transmitted, but they are encoded by producers and decoded by audiences. So encoding is where we're creating messages shaped by ideology and institutional power. So we're packing in all of that information. So the people that are doing this packing are going to be media producers, advertisers, and journalists. The decoding process happens by us, the audience. And this is the way that we interpret those messages based on our own culture, background, and experience. Now, with this, Hall identified three main ways that audiences decode messages. First is the dominant reading, and this is the way that an audience accepts the preferred meaning, agreeing and seeing what the producer's message really included. So, for example, a commercial sells the dream of success, and you buy into it. You think that the only way that you can show people that you're successful is by having a certain car or wearing a certain brand of clothing. Then we have negotiated readings. And this is where the audience partially agrees, but it adapts the message to their own context. Lastly, we have oppositional readings. And this is where the audience rejects the preferred meaning and interprets the message as a means of resistance or taking a far more critical approach. So, for example, seeing the perfect family as being completely unrealistic and or classist. Now, in other words, audiences aren't passive. And we know that through the rest of the lot of these videos. So much of the persuasion and ways that we communicate isn't based on passivity. We have to actively engage. We, in this case, are active interpreters of the messages that are being packed up and shipped to us. At the heart of what cultural studies is really about is hegemony. Not hegemony, hegemony. And this is a term borrowed from Italian thinker Antonio Gramsci. Now, hegemony describes how those in power maintain their dominance not through force, but through consent. They do this by shaping what we see as normal, as natural, as true. And media plays a huge role in this by reproducing dominant ideologies, ideas about gender, race, class, even nations that serve certain interests. But, and this is really crucial, hegemony is never total. Audiences can and do resist. They reinterpret and they subvert those messages when they feel needed. And that's where the real cultural power shifts occur. It's through the meaning. And the meaning, remember, comes from what we give that meaning. Now, we can see cultural studies everywhere we look. It's in how social media uses and remixes ads to critique capitalism. It's how fans rewrite narratives through their own fan fiction. And it's in how memes and viral content challenge mainstream ideologies. In fact, every act of media interpretation, from streaming a TV show or scrolling a hashtag, is a cultural act. We're constantly negotiating meaning in relations to our systems of power. Well, to sum this all up, we've got to remember a few things. One, cultural studies reminds us that media and meaning are never neutral, that power operates through culture, but also so does resistance. And understanding both of these things is key to becoming an informed, critical communicator. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Communication Campus. I am your host, Dr. Malynnda Stewart, and I can't believe to say this, but we are nearing the end of our communication theory exploration. In our next episode, we're going to start thinking about media effects a little bit more as we start looking at uses and gratifications theory. Until then, remember that meaning isn't just made by the media. It's made in each and every one of us. So consume wisely, interpret wisely, and above all else,